The Mohawk River, I should be more specific, right? So, as farmers in the pre-modern period, right before industrial agriculture really took over, the Mabees would have to be kind of uniquely in tune, or maybe not uniquely, but very much in tune with the natural world around them, right? Their life was seasonal, you know, the different kind of activities related to different times of the year, related to agriculture, whether that's plowing, planting in the spring, harvesting in the fall. You know, they had to work around what the natural seasons and cycles would dictate for them. And they would have to create something of a self-sustaining ecosystem here on the farm. One thing I'll point out, like you see all these trees around here, right? You see these forests. And you might be tempted to think that, you know, these forests have been here for a very long time. They look pretty well established today, right? But that's not at all the case. When the Mabees would have gotten here, they would have found a completely different natural landscape surrounding them, right? This piece of land, well, it would have been home to trees that were centuries old, right? The kinds of old growth forests that, like, today, if you want to find these types of forests, you're not going to find them anywhere in the state of New York. You can go all the way up to the peaks of the Adirondacks, right? The high peaks. And all these forests have at some point been logged. They really, really have. So we're talking about oak and hemlock and pine, which were 100, 200, maybe even 300 years old when the Mabees got here, and, well, unfortunately started chopping them down. Now, you know, we can kind of cut and judge them from 300 years after the fact, but they would need to do this, again, to create a agricultural landscape, to create fields that they could plow and where they could plant their crops. So as soon as the Mabees get here, and again, not just the Mabees, right? This is just inherent to the farming lifestyle. They would start of transforming this landscape, transforming this environment into something completely different than this. Mighty Mohawk River right over here. And again, kind of thinking about the natural landscape around us, I mean, so much of this area really revolves around this body of water, right? The flora and the fauna and eventually the people, right? For thousands and thousands of years, people have made their home on this river, you know, thousands of years before the Mabees ever showed up. This is just a naturally viable corridor for people and animals to come through. Whether you're traveling, whether you want to live, this is where you can go. And of course, the Mohawk River goes east and west. It kind of meanders its way through some very rough terrain, right? We've got the Catskills and the Appalachians to the south. We've got the Adirondacks to the north. This is the one natural corridor which will move along that east-west axis. And that's what provided transportation for so many generations, for so many people. Now, tell you what.
So now, where are Mabees from?
Where are the Mabees from? Great question. So the Mabees in 1705, the family itself, we've got Jan Mabee and Annette Mabee. That's the husband and the wife. We'll start with them. What's their ancestry? Well, their families both came over during the Dutch settlement of what is today New York, but of course the Dutch called it the New Netherlands. And in fact, for this part of the story, you guys want to go inside for this part of the story?
Sure.
Might make sense to go inside for this part of the story.
Okay.
We'll go to the house where the Mabees would live.
Yep.
The house they built for themselves in 1705.
Oh yeah. The house smells old.
Yeah. The kids, the school kids, always ask me if this is real food. Yeah, it's all fine. So guys, the babies, Jan and Alexia, maybe that's the husband and the wife who made this their home in 1705. Again, their families had come over during the Dutch colonization of this area. Jan's family was, as best as we can tell, possibly Scottish, possibly French, at least on his dad's side. That's where the name Mabee most likely comes from, the two candidates. His mother was a Dutch woman, though, so you might say that he's half Scottish, half Dutch, or half French, half Dutch. We may never know the full extent of that. But on the other side, Annetja, maybe, her father was a Dutch man. Her mother was a Mohawk woman, or somehow a Mohawk woman. Maybe she wasn't fully Mohawk, maybe her mother was a Mohawk woman. Basically, the Mohawks consider their families to be matrilineal, right? So they follow the mother's line, not the father's line. And one way or the other, the matrilineal line of this family in 1705 could be traced to the Mohawk people, who in 1705 were really just around the corner, right? Just about 12 miles that away, there was a Mohawk village in 1705. So that's less than a day's journey. That's pretty close. So I guess you could say, if you add it all up and do the math, their kids would have been about 50% Dutch, maybe a quarter Scottish, or a quarter French, who knows, and a quarter Mohawk, right? So it's a pretty diverse population out here, even back in 1705, right? Even all these folks are coming from various different parts of the world. Absolutely. And by the way, I will point out, when the Mabees first got here, their home, their whole house was really just this one room. So all that other stuff that you see, like that room there, the porch we walked through, there's a brick house out there, forget about all that stuff. This was their whole living space, these four walls. This was their front door. You guys see the window? How it actually is the frame of a door, right there. Compare that window to that window. Completely different, right? So this would have been the home for Jan and Annette, right? But also 8 of their 10 kids are still living with old mom and dad at this point in their lives. From a 20-year-old guy all the way down to a little 1-year-old girl.
Sounds like the Waltons except for us.
Yeah, right? Well, some things are different, yes, but
Yeah, I know.
But no, I mean that's a very common lifestyle, right? Have as many kids as you can, because those kids are going to be doing work. Those kids are economic assets to the family. And also, in the time before modern medicine, you expect to lose a couple of kids before they turn 10 years old. The Mabees were very lucky, or somehow fortunate. They kept all their kids alive. All 10 kids grew up to have kids of their own, right? But that's another reason why you want to have as many kids as possible in 1705, because you expect, honestly, half of them won't make it to their 10th birthday in an average household. So
Yeah, but did they even have birth control like to speak of in those days?
that's another reason to have as many kids. I mean, it's kind of hard to not have kids in that kind of a situation, right? So there's a lot of different motivations. There's a lot of different motivations, you might say.
And this is the cooking place and the fireplace both?
Yeah, so basically this is what the whole house revolves around. Now you may notice that this fireplace is a little bit different, right? From what you might usually see. This is a Dutch jamless style fireplace, which is unique to the Dutch settlers, the Dutch colonial influence, which in 1705 is still quite strong. Now just to clarify, the Dutch administration was kicked out by the English in 1664. In 1664, the English take over the Dutch colony. It's a Dutch colony, now under new English. Official documents will be written in English, certainly, like this one right here, but, the family's still speaking Dutch. And this would have been, their Dutch jamless fireplace, where all the heat, the food, the light, everything would revolve around this. And you better believe that Annetja, maybe, the lady of the house, this is kind of her station, right? This is where she's at, taking care of her youngest kids, taking care of the household, while Jan and the older kids are all outside doing some kind of work to produce food for the Mabees, right? Again, it's all about producing food. Wheat in particular. You can eat your wheat in the form of bread or cakes or pancakes or waffles, any kind of thing like that, right? But you can also drink your wheat, which is a little bit more fun, right? They can turn the wheat into beer, ferment it, and it's not just that these people want to be plastered all the time. There's a logic to this. Fermentation kills bacteria. In a time where people didn't understand what a bacteria or a pathogen was, they knew that if you fermented wheat or any other crop, that'll make things safe to drink, really.
And wasn't also for transportation purposes too? It was easier to transport liquor versus wheat itself.
Well, yes, that's a good point. Now, we'll just be careful to distinguish between transporting liquor is easy, transporting beer is not. Right? Beer is not going to stay.
Right, right.
If you put it in a cask and try to transport it down the Mohawk River, I wouldn't recommend that. But liquor, absolutely. Liquor.
But didn't they also have, when they crossed across the Atlantic, they had a certain form of beer that they actually did transport across the river, and that was like it's usually was like a 3 or 4 month journey, wasn't it?
Oh yeah,
from
for
Europe
sure.
over here.
I mean, you can transport beer. I guess it's just not going to be something you would do commercially.
Right.
Because let's say the Mabees wanted to ship a barrel of beer to some farming community west of here. It's not going to taste very good by the time it gets there, and those folks can also take their own wheat and pick up their own
use
beer.
it. Yeah.
So if you need it on the ship, absolutely take it with you.
Right.
But it's not going to be something you're not going to see them doing this commercially. Not in 1705.
Because I was reading something about that whiskey rebellion that came right after the Revolutionary War, where the people from West Virginia and so forth, they wanted to transport their wheat into alcohol form, but they got taxed. So that was one of the reasons for the whiskey rebellion.
Oh yeah. A lot of those folks were revolutionary veterans, right? They just fought the war. Like I thought we were doing the whole tax thing.
Right.
George Washington was like, well, yeah, but no, it's
Right.
So a good question about that. You said jamless?
jamless.
Yes. What does that mean?
Well, so it's kind of like an obscure thing, but so the jambs of a door are the sides of a door.
Yeah.
Again, you don't often like, oh, honey, can you please fix up the jambs of my door, please? I mean, you never really talk about jambs before. But with a fireplace, the jambs, again, you can see the sides of the fireplace right there. Those would be the jambs. This one doesn't have any of that. It's just a big hood right over your fireplace, essentially. And that's what this is. It's very simple to build. Not necessarily very efficient to heat this house. You're going to lose a lot of, hot air is going to kind of just draft right up with this. And you'll notice like the chimney has been filled in. This is actually a reproduction.
Okay.
We have the original woodwork in our collection, but this is a reproduction. So if you look up here, you're just going to see, but there would have been a big old hole up there. It would taper to a point, right? But there'd be a big old hole in your roof. And we don't know when they filled in the old Dutch jamless, but my guess would be as soon as possible.
Right.
Whenever they felt they could afford to do that. Yeah, folks. Speaking of the natural world, I mean, this is the Nature Bus Tour. Let's talk about these bad boys here. And I'm always talking about these with the 4th graders, but I can probably pitch it at a higher level for you guys, right? So the fur trade was probably the single most lucrative thing that the European society was interested in here in North America, right? Europeans are not colonizing places for fun or because it's nice weather here in New York. They're looking for valuable resources, whether that's gold, silver, spices. Of course, you can't find any of that stuff here, right? You can't grow cayenne pepper here. You can't grow cinnamon here or sugar, despite your best efforts. What you can do is you can get pelts, furs. This is a mink, but the most valuable would have been.
Is it all right to touch it?
Yeah, absolutely. Just be gentle with it. That's a mink right there. Just like a hipster weasel, right? So, beavers were by far the most valuable one. And these would be shipped all the way back to Europe, where they would fetch a pretty high price, essentially worth their weight in gold. You see, the Europeans, with how densely populated Europe was at the time, they had hunted all their beavers to extinction. There is to this day still European beavers, like 10 of them, right? Their populations still haven't really recovered. The Europeans get to North America and they find just the forest teeming with fur-bearing animals like these beavers. And, well, the Europeans want them, and the Native Americans are perfectly happy to provide these furs. Again, the furs serve as the basis for trade between colonial and Native American peoples. And this takes a toll on the environment as well, right? These beavers are hunted virtually to extinction in the state of New York, right? They exhaust the populations incredibly quickly. We're talking, tens of thousands of beaver pelts exported out of New York City per year through the colonial period. That's going to exhaust even the vast, wild spaces that we have here in the 17th and 18th centuries. So as this fur trade continues, the actual source of the furs will continue to retreat, right? When New York City is founded as New Amsterdam, the Dutch hunt out all the furs there. And then further and further, the furs retreat. northward up the Hudson River, and then westward along this Mohawk River corridor until by the end of the by the end of the colonial period, right, the start of the American Revolution, furs aren't coming from modern day Syracuse, they're coming from modern day Detroit. That's where you have to go and get your furs. And it's kind of remarkable how these pre-modern peoples without gas or electric power can so fundamentally shape the landscape around them. And in this particular case, it's even the Native Americans who were the ones actually harvesting the furs. The Europeans have these farms; they don't know their way around the woods. It's the Haudenosaunee, the Mohawk people, and their fellow Confederates who are going out and getting these furs. And it's kind of upsetting their traditional way of life as well. It's actually it's pretty remarkable how this dynamic changes life for people and animals throughout this whole area.
Right.
And there's a lot to talk about there. But
Okay, so mink, beaver, and what's this one?
everyone always asks me what this big one is here. I'll be honest, guys. I don't know what this one is. I think it's a big rabbit, like one of those big rabbits you see at the fair. Not one of these little guys here. Not one of these little cute guys here. But to be honest, all of these furs were here when I got here, so I didn't do it, folks. I didn't hunt them. But they're nice and soft.
Now, when they came here, were there any mills here, or did they have to mill their own lumber?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So there's no evidence of any mills on kind of this part of the property here, whether that's a grain mill, right, a grist mill, or a sawmill for cutting up longest wood. Eventually, by 1755, we know that the Mabees have a share or an interest, they're joint owners of a mill up on the Plotterkill Creek. You guys familiar with the Plotterkill Creek?
Yes.
Yeah, you passed over the Plotterkill Creek on your way here. It's just back that way on Route 5S. You're going to cross a bridge to get back over it. And then up at the top of the Plotterkill Creek, you may know that the Plotterkill goes over these beautiful, fantastic waterfalls.
Yeah.
And at the top of that, apparently, was where the Mabees sawmill was, which is quite a hike to get there, right? So they would saw up all their lumber there and I guess drag it down the hill somehow to get it here. But that wouldn't be until 1755.
Oh, okay.
So that's 50 years after the family gets here. They gotta wait for that.
Right.
And we don't know when they started that mill. That we just know that it's here, or it exists in 1755. As for, again, the grain, that's the most important thing to mill up. We don't really know exactly where that would get done, whether they would have to drag all their stuff back to the mills in Schenectady. There were a lot of mills in Schenectady that we know of.
By that time?
Oh yeah, long before the Mabees get here in 1705, Schenectady has been a town for, 44 years.
Oh, okay.
Right? So they had plenty of time to build up the simple infrastructure that a colonial town would need by the time the Mabees move out here. But yes, so that's a possible place where they would do their milling.
So what was they producing here? Wheat, corn?
Wheat primarily. The Mabees didn't grow a lot of corn. The Europeans were pretty slow on corn. Like, corn is a great crop. Like, if you want to feed a lot of people and you only have so much land, honestly, don't plant wheat, plant corn. Corn is just highly dense per acre for the calories you can get out of it. Of course, the Native Americans grew corn. Corn, beans, and squash was the staple of their diet. They kind of figured that out, and they had no trouble feeding themselves with that combination of crops. It would take a while before the Europeans would kind of pick up, oh, hey, maybe corn is something we should be growing. But wheat is the primary thing. And at first, it's a subsistence farm, right? They're trying to just put food on the table. As the farm improves, year after year, they can clear more land and plow more land, produce more wheat, process more wheat. And maybe at a certain point, we don't know when, they would start to have a surplus, right? A surplus of wheat, which they can then sell and use that as a sort of a cash crop. And eventually, if we want to look even further ahead to like the 19th century, the big cash crop here, the big thing that people would grow, is not food anymore. They would grow something called broom corn. And broom corn is a type of sorghum. It looks like corn, it looks a lot like corn, but it's not related at all, really. And you can turn that into, brooms, right? It's not edible. It doesn't biodegrade. It doesn't decompose ever. We grew some broom corn like 5 years ago, and the husks are still sitting in a pile out in our field just because it doesn't go anywhere. So it makes great brooms, though, and that was a big thing for Schenectady in this area. Let's say, 1825, around the emergence of the Erie Canal. That was the big thing that Mabees and other folks would be growing out here.
Except for this wall, everything is reproduction, right?
For the most part, most of the stuff that you see here and that you can touch is a reproduction
Right.
or a period piece.
Yeah.
The Mabees left us a lot of original pieces, which we have moved inside for safe keeping, for safe collection. I guess the one thing that's an original is this bad boy right here. It's pretty sturdy, so we feel comfortable leaving it out. And this would be a branding iron. A branding iron for Jan Mabee. And it's kind of an interesting little thing here. It's all kind of the three initials of his name combined into one little character. He's got a J for Jan, or John. He's got a P here for his middle name, or his father's name was Peter, so he's Peterson, Jan Peterson. And then the last name, the surname Mabee. Well, you can see that pretty prominently, right?
So that is an original.
This is indeed an original. And I don't know. Say what?
This is not original.
Probably not. I don't know where that came from. But it doesn't look like an original to me.
It looks like it.
If it was an original, then we probably shouldn't have put that tape on it, right? That's probably not very good. And I wonder, because one of Jan's sons became a blacksmith, his third eldest son. He had three sons, and the youngest son became a blacksmith. I wonder if that son, Abraham, made this for his dear old dad. I don't know. Could be.
You see?
Yeah, you can, yeah, it's okay to touch it. Sure.
Now, the cattle, did they bring them over from Europe? Or where
Well,
did they get the cattle from?
The Mabees would not have had to do that work. That work had already long been done.
Right.
But certainly, cattle are an import from Europe. Cattle, horses had to be re-imported to the American continent.
Right.
There were no horses in the American continent before the Spanish showed up and let a whole bunch loose. Sheep would be imported. I think oxen as well. Oxen are a Eurasian animal, right? So they got to come over. Pigs. Oh, pigs. Pigs are not. Again, speaking of nature, pigs have no natural predators here in North America.
Right,
Like
right.
you think maybe a wolf could hunt a pig, but those boars. Those big boars are nasty. You do not want to tussle with a boar. Even today, there are people who are like, sir, sorry, I'll just take that. Thank you, pal. Even today, there's like problems with wild
Right,
pigs
right,
kind of
wild
running
boars,
amok
right.
through like Alabama and stuff.
Yeah.
So the colonial folks figured out that they could just let their pigs kind of just run around through the woods. They run amok through the woods, rooting around, eating anything that came their way. Nothing would harm them. Eventually, the pigs would come back home, and then they're nice and big and juicy and ready for ready for the slaughter. Right? So, yeah, most of these animals that the Mabees would be using would be descendants of animals not so long ago imported into this continent.
So where would they actually get these animals? Since they aren't already established here.
Well, they would have had to buy them from someone else, you know.
Maybe like from Schenectady somewhere, somebody might have been a dealer there, whatever,
Yeah, maybe
or
not
farm.
a dealer per se. I mean, there wasn't as much of a market here that you can have someone who's like just like a wholesaler of animals. You would just buy it from a farmer.
A local farmer who had extra or was willing to sell it.
Yep.
Remember the
But there was very little quote unquote money actual in circulation, so most of the stuff was bartered, wasn't it?
Yeah, that's a great point. That's another great point is that this is in many ways a cashless economy. Big purchases like the property would be conducted in cash, right? But most of your everyday expenses are going to be on credit, right? You're bartering things on credit. Like you don't even necessarily have to have the 10 pounds of butter to barter right now, but you know, and it's also not that you have a piece of plastic that's your credit card, but people would give you credit. And if you lived up to your promises, you have good credit, right? People will give you that kind of credit.
Right.
If you did not live up to your promises and at the assigned kind of, you know, date you could not produce the resources you promised to barter, well then you got bad credit. And you don't need a reporting agency to tell your bank that. Everyone in the town knows everyone else, and they all heard how you shortchanged, you know, Mr. Peak that one time, and they're not going to want to deal with you. And that's kind of how this economy could work, right? It's a cashless bartering system, but very often you're bartering even on credit. You don't have to have the stuff right there with you to exchange.
Right.
Yeah.
Interesting.
I mean, these are great questions, guys. Would you like to take a look at the farm? We want to brave the elements to go out to the farm?
Sure.
Oh, yeah.
All mean, we only got so much time. Obviously, there's a lot I can tell you here about the Mabees, but
Farmer market where they used to, exchange their produces or something.
well, I don't know about that. I've never heard of such a thing.
Are the plates originals or replicas?
No, those are replicas too.
Replicas.
Yeah,
What
those.
about that pot back there at the?
Those are period pieces, so not maybe original pieces, but
Period.
they're period pieces.
Oh,
Pieces we don't care that much about.
yeah.
All right, folks, I want to take you on over to the barn real quick. So let's suit up here.
This is it.